but she just got a remote job in Chicago, so she didn't benefit from the new law. She says knowing the hiring company's pay range would have reassured her she wasn't underselling herself.
For me as a woman of color, it was difficult to bring myself to negotiate, but then being able to get the range up front, I can see something like that making a huge difference.
The competitive market did give her a boost. Her salary and signing bonus offer put her at 70% more than the job she left. But of course, she doesn't know how that compares with her new colleagues. In Hartford, I'm Harriet Jones for Marketplace.
Our producers are Rose Conlon, Meredith Gerritsen, Stephen Ryan, Alex Schroeder, Daniel Shin, and Erica Soderstrom. In New York, I'm Sabri Benishore with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
FarmShare, working to provide food for the 3.9 million Floridians who don't know where they will receive their next meal this holiday season. Those who wish to help or learn more about how FarmShare fights food insecurity in Florida can visit farmshare.org/holidays.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Law Firm.
I'm Wayne Hogan. The Move Over Law protects police, fire, EMS, utility, and sanitation personnel by requiring drivers to move over and slow down for their vehicles.
Learn more at waynehogan.law.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect with Melissa Ross. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
The eyes of America are focused on a courtroom in South Georgia. I'm Melissa Ross, and just ahead this hour on First Coast Connect, high-profile visitors this week to the trial of the men accused of killing a Brunswick man, Ahmaud Arbery. We'll speak with First Coast News' Ann Schindler about the latest in the trial as the Reverend Jesse Jackson comes to court. That's coming up. Then later,
from the administration to the city council to nonprofits, everyone's really, really ready for resilient solutions and excited to get to work and start making changes.
How to protect Jacksonville from the impacts of climate change. A conversation with the city's first ever resilience officer, Ann Colonisi. All of that and more is ahead. After the day's news.
Live from NPR News, I'm Nora Rahm. The fate of homicide suspect Kyle Rittenhouse is now in the hands of a Wisconsin jury. My Ian Silver of member station WUWM reports.
The prosecution and defense argued diametrically opposed takes on the previous 2 weeks of testimony and video evidence. The jury must now decide if Rittenhouse acted in self-defense when he killed 2 people and injured a third on the streets of Kenosha in August 2020. After closing arguments, the court repeated to the jury, which is not sequestered, that it must not read, watch, or listen to anything about the case or discuss the case with anyone.
You will pay no heed to the opinions of anyone, even the President of the United States or the President before him.
The jury was released for the night and will start deliberating Tuesday morning. For NPR News, I'm Ayan Silver in Kenosha.
For the first time in its history, Boston will inaugurate an elected mayor today who is not a white man. Michelle Wu, who's Asian American, is the city's first woman and first person of color elected to lead the city. As NPR's Tovia Smith reports, Wu will replace acting Mayor Kim Janey, a black woman, who inherited the job temporarily when her predecessor left.
Acting Mayor Janey was one of 3 black candidates hoping to win a full term, but never made it past the first round of voting. Once they were out, Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley endorsed Wu, who ran on a progressive platform and vowed to make the city a Boston for everyone.
And I expect that the black community will hold her accountable, because this is about changing the legacy of the city of Boston.
For her part, outgoing acting Mayor Janey says she's proud to have advanced the conversation around racial equity in her short time in office, but she says there's a lot more work to be done. Tovia Smith, NPR News, Boston.
Cuban officials prevented anti-government protests in Cuba yesterday. Activists calling for greater political freedoms were hoping for a repeat of widespread protests in July. CNN reporter Patrick Ottman is covering the story in Havana. He says the government was ready this time.
They deployed police and plainclothes state security agents across the island well in advance of the planned protests. Activists we saw were kept from leaving their homes by these mobs of angry government supporters, and there were arrests. Unlike those spontaneous protests in July, the Cuban government knew when this protest would take place and who many of the people that were planning on going out and protesting were, and that really allowed them to bring their many resources.
Patrick Ottman spoke with NPR. Asian markets opened higher this morning after last night's video summit with Chinese leader Xi Jinping and President Biden. It was their longest exchange as world leaders, more than 3 hours. This is NPR News.
Good morning, it's 9:04. From the WJCT Newsroom, 89.9 in Jacksonville, I'm Raymond Troncoso. Thanks for joining us. Florida lawmakers are meeting this week to pass several bills aimed at curbing federal COVID-19 vaccination requirements. One of the measures would give workers more opportunities to get out of vaccine mandates from their private employer. Still, a federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration rule requires workers at large businesses to get a coronavirus shot by early next year. House Speaker Chris Sprowse says the state legislation wouldn't conflict with the federal rule because a judge recently halted it.
The judge put the injunction in place, so right now the OSHA rule is not in effect. So I would tell business owners and have told business owners they are under no obligation to follow the OSHA rule because there is an injunction in place. I believe the Attorney General will be successful on the challenge.
Florida has joined Georgia and Alabama in suing the federal government over its rule requiring private workers to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Republican lawmakers say they believe the U.S. Supreme Court will ultimately find the OSHA rule unconstitutional and overturn it. Right now, there's a stay on the rule in a separate lawsuit filed by several other states, including Texas and Mississippi. It's currently in the high 50s in Jacksonville. Our forecasted high for the day is 72. It's going to be mostly sunny, and tonight we're expecting a low around 53 with light and variable winds. Tomorrow, expect it to be sunny again with a high near 77. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Coming up is First Coast Connect with Melissa Ross in about 5 seconds. Thank you for listening.
News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Indeed, a hiring platform that connects businesses with candidates. Indeed partners with businesses to help attract, screen, and interview from one place. More at Indeed.com/hire.
From Jesse Jackson to Al Sharpton and more. High-profile visitors focus the eyes of America on a courtroom in Brunswick, Georgia. Good morning. We're live from Studio 5. I'm Melissa Ross, and this is First Coast Connect. Thanks for listening. Just ahead this hour, testimony continues this week in the trial of the Georgia men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery. We'll have the latest. Let us know your thoughts. It's 549-2937 to join the conversation. Then later, another conversation, this one with the city's first ever chief resilience officer and her plans to protect Jacksonville from the impacts of climate change. All of that and more ahead. But first this morning, a judge on Monday denied mistrial requests at the trial of 3 white men charged with murdering Ahmaud Arbery, a black man, in Brunswick, Georgia. Now, this happened after high-profile African-American leaders came to town to follow the trial. Defense attorneys claimed jurors were tainted by weeping from the gallery when Arbery's parents sat with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. The Reverend Al Sharpton has also visited Brunswick to follow the proceedings. The judge said he found one defense lawyer's complaints last week about black pastors visiting the courtroom to be reprehensible and that no group would be excluded from his courtroom. Meanwhile, testimony continues. We are pleased once again to welcome Ann Schindler of First Coast News. She has been covering the trial gavel to gavel, and she's on the line now to bring us up to date. Hi, Ann. Good morning.
Hey, Melissa. Good morning. How are you?
Great, thanks. Always great to have you on the show. And as we talk about the latest in the trial of the accused killers of Ahmaud Arbery, give us a call, 549-2937. Emails to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Tweets to @MelissaInJax. So really dramatic, Ann, as the Reverend Jesse Jackson visited, the Reverend Al Sharpton also visiting. The defense lawyers for the men accused of killing Mr. Arbery tried to have Jackson kicked out of court and actually said that no more black pastors should be allowed to attend the trial. Tell us what happened in court Monday.
Well, Monday was a little bit of a retread of what happened on Friday. Kevin Goff, who's the attorney for one of the three defendants, William Roddy Bryan, had said on Friday he didn't want any more black pastors coming in. He was suggesting at the time that there was this sort of effort to bring in serially, high-profile African-American representatives and influencers as an effort to impact the jury. That was kind of his allegation. And, of course, his phrasing was very rough about that. He ended up apologizing kind of in a lukewarm fashion later that day. And, in fact, his own co-counsel basically denounced what he said, saying that what he presented to the court was asinine and ridiculous, was the language that he used. So, he was under fire for his comments, and I think that's what made it all the more surprising yesterday when he came to court and basically rekindled this whole argument, pointing out that the Reverend Jesse Jackson was in the courtroom. Now, at this point, the juror's out, but the gallery's still there, including the Reverend Jackson. And he said he wanted him to ask the judge to make him leave, to go watch court from the overflow courtroom, said that his presence was going to be a distraction and influence the jury. And then he went on to make some, very kind of insulting comments about, who is really representing the Arbery family. Is this really their pastor? Who's next? Is Raphael Warnock going to be the next pastor coming? So, and again, very incendiary comments. What was different this time, however, was that it followed an emotional outburst from Ahmaud Arbery's mother. And the other defense counsel, even as they distanced themselves from Kevin Goff, said they too were concerned about the presence of what they called an icon of the civil rights movement, this very powerful person in the courtroom comforting Arbery's mother as she wept, saying that that was something that they fear will influence the jury simply because he's so well respected.
But the bottom line is the pastors get to stay, and are they expected to keep visiting?
Yes. So tomorrow is going to be a big day. Let's see, no, not tomorrow, Thursday. They're expecting hundreds of people to show up and to join in a community prayer session. It's something that the city of Brunswick is embracing. They've actually put it on Twitter that there's going to be this event and that local clergy are going to be there to welcome the pastors as they come to town and kind of have a unity gathering, I guess. However, they are, this is in direct response to these comments that this attorney made, which is something that the judge pointed out to him yesterday. He kind of chastised Goff a couple of times, as you mentioned, calling his comments last week reprehensible, but also saying, look, this is happening because of what you're saying. This is something that is, a creation of the comments that you're making. You're inciting people to respond. You're creating, the very thing that you say that you're worried about. And he actually pointedly said to him, I don't know what you're trying to do here. I just don't get it. It seems like you're trying to do something beyond what you're presenting here in court. I think very much saying to him, look, we all know there's a wider audience for this trial, and your words are having an impact. You have to be aware that that's something that is happening.
Now, for people who haven't followed this case, it dates back to February 2020, right before the pandemic hit America. Up in Brunswick, a father and son, Greg and Travis McMichael, armed themselves and pursued Mr. Arbery, a 25-year-old man who was running through a neighborhood. Another man, William Roddy Bryan, joined the chase and took cell phone video of Travis McMichael shooting Arbery 3 times with a shotgun. The McMichaels told police they believed Arbery was a burglar after security cameras had recorded him looking at a home under construction a few houses away. They claimed they were trying to make a citizen's arrest. Now, Anne, as we talk about the case, it is an almost all-white jury that does not reflect the racial makeup of Brunswick, Georgia. What constitutes a jury of one's peers, especially in a racially charged case like this one?
Well, I mean, that's, I think, an open question. The judge himself acknowledged that this really was a jury selected through a racially biased lens. He said it was chosen in a discriminatory fashion, which is a pretty astonishing thing for a judge to say. I think a lot of people are just kind of, gobsmacked that he actually said that. In this case, the defense has said they don't think it's a jury of their peers. The same attorney has complained that there aren't enough bubbas on the jury to represent basically his defendant, who he's portrayed as sort of a hapless mechanic who's not got a very good education. And so he's bemoaned that fact. But the fact that there's one black juror out of the entire panel right now of 15, one person was excused for illness, and there's 3 alternates. So you've got 15 people there. We don't know who the jury is, except we do know that the African-American member is a juror and not an alternate. But yeah, it's a jury that doesn't reflect the population of Brunswick, certainly, which is about a third black, and it doesn't reflect the panel, which came in roughly representative of the city's population. They basically struck every juror that got past the initial qualification that was not white.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to First Coast Connect on 89.9. We're talking about the latest in the trial of the men in Georgia accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery. Give us a call. It's 549-2937. Here is an email from a listener. It looks as though the Reverend Jesse Jackson is going to join leaders in Jacksonville today. He's going to be appearing today at 4 o'clock at the Greater Macedonia Baptist Church at 1880 Edgewood Avenue West at the invitation of pastors here in Duval County. There will be a community meeting with clergy, faith leaders, activists to talk about the Justice for Ahmaud March and the Black Pastors' call to action. So, Anne, it looks as though this story is migrating down here to Jacksonville as people get involved. And, I want to get your thoughts about not only this trial, but the fact that the testimony is continuing in Brunswick at the same time. Closing arguments are happening as we speak in Wisconsin in the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, the teenager who stands accused of killing 2 people at a riot in Kenosha, Wisconsin, after unrest there involving a police-involved shooting. These 2 trials have similar, they reflect similar tensions in this country. And, as we follow the potential verdicts, people are watching what might come out of these courtrooms with trepidation, I think it's fair to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a theme that you see in these 2 is kind of what people might broadly consider vigilante justice, right? You have people who are trying to, in their words, protect their community, and they're taking up arms to do it. And then in the end, their decision to use those weapons becomes a self-defense argument that they present. So they've armed themselves to accomplish something, and then when they are in a situation where they feel threatened, then those weapons become a tool of self-defense. And so in that way, they are similar. I mean, obviously, there's also a racial element to both these cases, even though the victims in the Rittenhouse case, even though the judge is not allowing them to be called victims, but the victims in the Rittenhouse case were white, but it was at a Black Lives Matter protest that this happened in the context of all of the post-George Floyd protesting. So that case also has kind of a racial dynamic, and certainly this one does, because I think that there's broadly expressed a sense that if this young man had not been Black, in whatever context he was in that community, that it wouldn't have ended as it did.
549-2937, Nicholas calling from Fleming Island. Nicholas, good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just wanted to state my comment. I believe that what these 3 men are doing is just absolutely ridiculous. They want to throw a black pastor out of the courtroom for whatever reason. And it's just really, really hard to believe that people like this actually exist in this time.
All right. Well, thanks for that. You know, as you've been reporting, and this really was a riveting scene where these nationally known figures were told they should leave the courtroom. The judge did not give the defense what they wanted. You know, let me ask you about more of your reporting on the witness stand Monday. A Georgia Bureau of Investigation firearms examiner testified that Ahmaud Arbery's T-shirt had large holes with singed edges. That suggests that the shotgun barrel used was either pressed right up against him or almost touching him when it was fired into his chest. When we talk about some of the specifics of the expert testimony, how do you sense that's landing with the jury in Brunswick?
Well, they seem to be very attentive. And again, this is a situation where I rotate in only on occasion. It's a pool reporting situation. And so the other days, we rely on the pool reporters that are in there. But the accounts that we heard from Monday was a very attentive jury. They have notepads that they have been using to record some of these things, particularly when there's, specific testimony of the kind that we've been hearing from the experts. I don't know how testimony like that close-range shotgun wound falls with the jury, simply because both sides are using it to indicate, on one side, sort of the savagery of his death, and on the other side, the allegation that it was so close because Arbery was trying to take the shotgun from the defendant. So they're both using that piece of evidence to carry their argument forward. And so the jury is attentive, but it doesn't necessarily tell us anything about what they might be thinking. But again, this is one of those cases where, at least for the last several days, most of the narrative and the drama around the trial has happened outside of the presence of the jury. They've been instructed not to follow news stories, and they're not sequestered, but they're not supposed to be talking about the case or following the case. But certainly most of the stuff that's being written about the case right now is stuff that they would have no knowledge of sitting in a courtroom.
5492937. Ralph in San Marco. Hi, Ralph. Good morning.
I'm going to be on the air in a minute.
You're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, Melissa. I was a prosecutor here in the 4th Judicial Circuit, which is Clay, Duval, and Nassau counties, back in the 70s and early 80s, and I tried a first-degree murder case in Nassau County, and the defendant in that case was a young white man who had gone into a magic market there in Fernandina, downtown Fernandina proper, the city, and had gone into a magic market and shot and killed a young black man who was the clerk. And he shot him with a shotgun. Shot the black man with a shotgun, and twice with a single barrel shotgun. So it was a clear murder case, and it was a tough case. There were no witnesses to the crime, and the defense in that case is just the reverse of what you have up in Brunswick. The defense in that case excluded all the black jurors, prospective black jurors, that were called to in the panel, that were called up as prospective jurors, so that we wound up. As a prosecutor, I wound up with an all-white jury rather than a mixed jury, which is what I wanted to have, and we tried that case and ultimately won it. Ultimately, the jury, it was an all-white jury, convicted the white defendant of first-degree murder and recommended the death penalty at the time. And what was interesting, the judge at the time was Henry Adams, who's a federal judge here in the north, in this district of Florida, now a federal judge. He did not give the man the death penalty, though. He gave him life imprisonment.
So, Ralph, I guess you were a really good prosecutor, number one. Number two, is this your take on saying that to have faith that the jury in Brunswick can look at the facts impartially and deliver justice however that comes down?
I think so. I clearly wanted to have black jurors on the jury. But they were all excluded with the peremptory challenges that the defense had, and But I firmly believe that the jury, the jurors will obey their oaths, and that they promised to obey their oath, that they could try the case fairly and impartially, and not let race come into this matter at all. And as far as their determination of guilt or innocence, and I think they will, certainly.
Thank you, Ralph. Thanks for sharing your memories of that too. Okay, so Ann Schindler, the evidence in this trial is compelling, and of course, the reason it has become a national flashpoint is the video. How powerful do you believe the video evidence will be in aiding the jury's verdict one way or the other?
Well, it's impactful. I mean, it's, I think, difficult to watch every time. The jury pays attention to it when it's shown, and it's being shown a lot. I mean, it is, one of those pieces of evidence that comes up with a lot of witnesses. So I don't know if they get, somewhat hardened to it by watching it, but certainly so far they've been paying a lot of attention, and it never gets, I think, less hurtful for the family watching it. It is a difficult video to watch, but this case is not about the facts so much. It's really about the jury's interpretation. So you can look at the video as much as you want, but it's up to them to determine the appropriateness of the behavior of the defendants. And that's not something that is a fact determination. That's something that they're going to have to figure out for themselves in their deliberations, whether they believe that the defendants acted appropriately and whether they were, in their defense argument, acting in self-defense.
5492937. WC in Arlington. WC, how are you? Go ahead.
I'm doing fine this morning. I just want to make a comment about, as a black man, I know for a fact there's just some white people, not all white people. I know some great, good white people. But there are some white people that still have that same disrespect that brought them to Africa and made black people slaves. They have that attitude, and I think that's part of the problem up there in Brunswick. Those guys seem to have had that attitude that it was cool. It was okay to just disrespect a black person to that point.
WC, thanks for the call. Certainly that's the argument the prosecution will make, and that they chased Ahmaud Arbery down, shot him in cold blood when he wasn't doing anything wrong, that they would not have suspected him of being a criminal if he weren't a black man. That's the argument the prosecution is making. The defense is going to try to argue that under the law, these men had the right to make a citizen's arrest. That's a statute in Georgia that dates from the Civil War era and is not really commonly used today. How likely is that legal argument to have any impact?
Well, I mean, they're able to use that citizen's arrest law in this case, even though it's been, eradicated since this, because of this instance. Mm-hmm. But it's not just the citizen's arrest law that they're working under. They're really building a case, and I will say that their attorneys representing the two McMichaels, who are two sets of attorneys from Atlanta, are very, very good attorneys, and they're portraying a situation in which there was what they're calling a serial intruder, someone who came, and that the house under construction was having visitors, particularly someone who later became identified as Ahmaud Arbery, in there in very late at night in the dark, and had prompted a number of calls, had prompted other neighbors to arm themselves and search for him. So they're portraying this as a neighborhood that was very much on edge. There'd been a number of burglaries. There'd been a number of suspicious person calls. And so the way that they're framing it is, I can't remember the wording that they used during their opening, but basically they're making a case that these people were doing kind of their neighborhood civic duty by trying to protect their home and their environs there. And then the citizens arrest law being the legal mechanism by which they, were executing it. But they're trying to paint a situation in which they were, quote unquote, justifiably fearful of what was happening, of this person that was showing up again and again in their neighborhood that was unidentified. So that's their angle. And as I said, they've been able to articulate some very, powerful arguments. They're very skilled counsel, and they're good at their cross examinations as well of these witnesses.
Vic emails the show. Shouldn't the white vigilantes being tried for murder in Georgia and Wisconsin be referred to as confessed killers rather than accused killers? Under the law, they're accused, Vic, until they're convicted. But he references the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, and as I mentioned, closing arguments are happening right now in Wisconsin in that other high-profile trial. I don't think much of America would be surprised if the jury there did not convict Kyle Rittenhouse of the most serious charges that have been leveled against him. Anyone that's been following that trial might have that take. Meanwhile, the testimony continues in the trial in Brunswick. Can you give us a timeline when we might see a verdict in Brunswick?
Well, that is an elusive question, and it changes day by day, particularly because these distractions, I guess, if you will, keep coming up and taking up more time in court than anybody would have anticipated. If that doesn't continue to happen, however, we are looking probably at a jury that would get closing arguments. Well, so that's the question. They don't want this jury deliberating over Thanksgiving. So if it comes down to having the closing arguments not begin until next week, what the defense says they'll do is ask the judge to move closing arguments until after Thanksgiving. So if we get closing arguments this week, we probably would go into deliberations right before Thanksgiving, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. But if we don't get to closing arguments this week, they're going to ask to postpone the whole of it until after the holidays so that jurors aren't eager to get out of there, to, kind of crank out a verdict and leave for their family celebrations. They want to make sure that they're able to hear the closing arguments, which will be hours and hours long, and then take their time deliberating without, rushing them or making them feel hassled. So that is a possibility. It depends on how long, each day takes, and each day takes longer than expected every day.
Well, in the meantime, we will follow it, and it's always great to have your insights. Ann Schindler of First Coast News covering the Ahmaud Arbery trial in Brunswick. Thank you so much, Ann, for being with us, as always.
Thanks, Melissa. Nice talking to you.
You as well, and much more still ahead. Later, our dining series checks in on a new place that brings the feel of old New York to town. But up next.
From the administration to the city council to nonprofits, everyone's really, really ready for resilient solutions and excited to get to work and start making changes.
How to make Jacksonville a more resilient city. We'll speak with the new Chief Resilience Officer in town after this. Don't go away. It's 9:31. You're listening to First Coast Connect on 89.9. Back in a moment. Well, she's the city's first ever Chief Resilience Officer. And Ann Colonisi has a lot on her plate. I spoke with Colonisi about her ambitious plans to make Jacksonville more resilient to the impacts of climate change. Here's that conversation. Hi, Ann. Good to be with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So there's a lot of interest in you around town. You're the first person ever to serve as the city's Chief Resilience Officer. Tell us about what it's been like for you in these initial months as you get settled into the role.
It's been really great so far. I don't know of any other person who's stepped into a chief resilience officer role in another city with this level of enthusiasm and excitement for this work. It really seems like across the board, from the administration to the city council to nonprofits, everyone's really, really ready for resilient solutions and excited to get to work and start making changes. So for me coming in, that's just kind of the best possible landscape to have landed in.
Sure. And of course, Jacksonville had been criticized for being really behind the eight ball on this. Other Florida cities have had this kind of position for a while now because we do face such impacts from climate change, sea level rise, water rise inland, more extreme storms, all kinds of negative impacts. So tell us a little bit about your top priorities and how you plan to help Jacksonville better mitigate against what we expect to be happening here.
Well, one thing I'll say is that even though this is the first time Jacksonville's had a CRO, there's been a lot of resilience work underway for years. And so that puts me in a really good position to hit the ground running on things. For example, the city's planning department stood up the Adaptation Action Area Work Group to look at how are we mapping our high hazard coastal areas. The Public Works Department has been working on a model for a vulnerability assessment, things that we're able to scale up and serve as kind of a baseline for me and my work. So I think coming in, a lot of groundwork's been laid. So the direction I'm hoping to take it is pulling together kind of that baseline science and data, layering it on top of community priorities, economic and social priorities, and then come up with a suite of interventions that can really address risk here in Jacksonville. And those interventions could be at the policy level. Many of them I expect to be physical infrastructure projects, and others might be more programmatic. If we're putting in more green infrastructure, do we need a workforce development program that trains people in how to build green infrastructure so that we make sure we can capture kind of that economic benefit of these solutions? So that's the direction I'm hoping to take it, and have kind of a comprehensive resilience strategy where all of those resilience interventions are housed and easily communicated to the public.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. You were chosen to lead Jacksonville's resilience effort out of candidates from across the country. You come at this with a deep bench of experience, including at the federal level. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I came here from the city of New Orleans, where I was running their coastal resilience program, looking at how sea level rise and coastal land loss increased New Orleans risk and finding nature-based solutions to address that, and really got a deep dive into one of the most vulnerable parts of the country and parts of the world with respect to hurricane risk. And then pairing that with kind of a federal background, I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with pretty much every federal agency and have insight into how they're baking in climate change into not only their internal operations, but also the way that they run their grant programs and other programmatic elements. So seeing it from that high level and then seeing that hyper-local on-the-ground experience in New Orleans, I'm hoping to bridge those two together and really have the broadest possible lens for Jacksonville and use a lot of the best practices that I've seen nationally and then also from my personal background in New Orleans. And I hope that that'll be a really big asset to this work and make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel, where we're really building off of some of the best practices that are being done across the nation.
Now, the impacts of climate change tend to affect people of color and low-income communities more harshly. What do you think the city should be doing to address this problem?
I think when you look at things like who's getting flooded, who's having problems with urban heat. You absolutely can see those parallels to communities of color and low income or vulnerable communities. So naturally, if we're looking at this either from a social perspective or just from the raw scientific data, both avenues are going to lead us to the same outcome, which is that those are communities that are going to need an increase in green infrastructure projects, increase in tree canopy that can address both flooding and reduce heat. So I think that is going to be a huge target area for this work. And I absolutely expect that equity will be central to how I move forward with shaping the city's resilience.
And how do you deal with people who still are sort of in denial about this? They don't believe climate change is real, or they've accepted that it's real, but they just don't think it's a serious problem.
I think at this point, the science is very clear, and it matters less if an individual personally believes that because their insurance company is going to believe that.
Yeah, right.
We're seeing markets change. And so this is, if you can see the water rising, we can see the difference in summer rainstorms that are hitting a city like Jacksonville now versus 10 years ago. There's just more water. And if that isn't enough to kind of turn your perspective on this, certainly some of those financial and market-based measures are going to be a big indicator that this is in fact happening. And I also think that's a huge motivation behind this administration to really address this as quickly as possible, because if not, we could be, setting ourselves up for an even worse situation. So really that financial and risk is a huge foundation for why we have to act on climate and why we have to act now.
And of course, time is of the essence. You are working with a number of stakeholders on an overall strategy, a vulnerability assessment for the city, and a strategy. When do you think we might be seeing more details about that?
Well, I think it's most important that we get it right. So certainly we want to get this on the ground as quickly as possible, but we also want to make sure that we're careful enough and intentional enough in how we're rolling out resilience, that it's done right. Because if it's not, then we would hate for this to be a short-term fix. We really want this to be something that not only lasts for the next 5 years, but also the next 25 years. And so I think much of the next year will be incorporating these different planning elements, whether that's the vulnerability assessment and the technical data or broad-based stakeholder engagement, and kind of pulling those things together and setting our goals and identifying projects. But the hope is that even during that time, while this planning work is going on, there are things we can do, making use of the city's tree mitigation fund, trying to get as much tree canopy as we can, as quickly as we can. Those are things that we don't have to necessarily wait on. But when we're thinking about large pieces of new infrastructure that might be needed to address the impacts of climate change, there you really want to make sure the science is behind you, and that does just inherently take a bit more time.
Well, I appreciate your time, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. She's Ann Colanesi, the first ever Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Jacksonville. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Today's segment of Going Green is sponsored in part by North Florida Land Trust.
It is 9:41. This is First Coast Connect on 89.9. Now let's talk a little bit more about Florida's climate. It makes a cozy environment for a variety of plant species, but some of them are invasive and destructive. You don't want those in your yard. However, there's a new guide to help you out. It's been developed by UF and their Institute of Food and Agriculture Sciences Extension Office. And it tells you which plants to embrace in our lush landscape and which plants to avoid. With more about Plant This, Not That, we welcome Tina McIntyre. She's a Florida-friendly landscaping agent with UF and worked on this book. Hey, Tina.
Good morning.
So good to talk to you. I can't wait to read this because I want to do some landscaping in my own yard, and I want to plant native plants, not invasive plants and plants that aren't good for my yard and for the community. Tell us a little bit about Plant This, Not That, and what prompted you guys to write this.
Yeah, so I have a background in conservation biology, and starting as a extension agent, I really felt that there wasn't a lot of resources for homeowners or professionals to better understand what is a Florida-friendly landscaping plant, a native plant, a safe plant versus a plant that's going to be invasive and harmful to our environment. And so it's a very easy, user-friendly guide, field guide that you can take to the nursery when you're buying a plant. And it's going to show you a picture and the scientific name, the common name, all of the information about the invasive species that is actually still commercially available versus the alternative, safe Florida-friendly plant that's going to be good for your yard, good for pollinators, and all that good stuff.
I didn't realize this, but the annual impact of invasive plants, animals, and disease to Florida's agriculture industry is estimated at 179 million annually. So if you're a homeowner, a landscaper, you run a nursery, you need to be careful what plants you buy and put in the ground, because even though some invasive plants are prohibited in Florida, many others are commonly used, right? What are some common invasive plants that you would prefer people not be using?
Right. So a big one right now is actually the camphor tree, which we've all known to be a problem for a while now throughout the state. And it's getting looked at to be added to the Florida Department of Ag noxious weed list, which would make it prohibited. Though it's not currently on that list, it is invasive as deemed by the Florida Invasive Species Partnership, University of Florida IFAS assessment, and our Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plant Species. So it is a bad plant, and it's super common in our landscapes throughout Florida. So we're recommending that it is removed and planted with, say, a turkey oak or a native live oak species.
And what are some native plants or plants you recommend? What are some good ones on your list?
Absolutely. So we have our state tree, which is the sable palm or cabbage palm. That's a fantastic Florida-friendly palm that can exist in a variety of wet, dry, sun, shade, all types of pH environments. So it's a hardy Florida native, Florida-friendly plant. We also have our red mulberry. So a lot of the invasive plants that we enjoy might also be edible, and so they're edible and they're dispersed by wildlife. Something like the cayenne cherry we want to really avoid, but instead of selecting that, we want to look for the red mulberry, which is a fantastic food plant for humans, absolutely, but also animals and wildlife. So, the red mulberry or Morus rubra is pictured and listed in the book.
Let's talk about the book. Again, we're speaking with Tina McIntyre of UF's Agriculture Extension Office. She's a Florida-friendly landscaping agent, and their new book is called Plant This, Not That. How can people get their hands on this book?
Well, the best way is to go to the UF IFAS Extension bookstore. And so if you just type in your search browser, UF IFAS, that's IFAS bookstore, and then do a search there for the Plant This, Not That. It'll come up, and you can see an image of the ID deck of the book and purchase it. It is under $15, so very affordable. We wanted to make this something that is accessible.
So people can buy it online. And, I want to take a moment going beyond the book to talk about just what an amazing resource IFAS is, the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences at the University of Florida. UF gets attention for so many things, but this is a discipline and a study area that I think is so fantastic and so fascinating. Going beyond the book, tell us a little bit more about the mission of this office.
Absolutely. So the University of Florida is what we call our land grant university here in Florida, along with FAMU. And so we actually have an extension office in every single 67 counties throughout Florida. So there's one in Jacksonville, at Duval, and where I'm located in Seminole County. And what we do is we bring the research and the science-based information to the public. And that's our job in various types of aspects. So we do, in my job, Florida Friendly Landscaping. I teach about, home landscaping and different types of, teaching landscapers or homeowners. We also do education in family and consumer sciences. So stuff like nutrition and finance and, kind of home economic type things. We have our youth education program through 4-H, where we teach kids about and students about various types of life, important life skills through 4-H. And we have, of course, what we're known most for is our agricultural education, teaching farmers, and also our Master Gardener volunteer program. We have our Master Gardeners that help teach residents and help solve those various landscaping issues that we might, see arising in our landscape.
Check it out, everyone. Just Google UF-IFAS. It's their Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. And as Tina mentioned, they have extension offices all over the state. This is a great gift, by the way, this new book for the gardener in your life. This new book is called Plant This, Not That, a guide to avoiding invasive species and sticking to native plants here in our Florida landscape, where certain plants do better than others, just like everywhere. So Tina McIntyre, she's a Florida-friendly landscaping agent with UF and one of the book's authors. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And in a moment, our occasional dining series checks in on a new place as the Southern Italian Deli and Market brings an old New York feel to Jacksonville. That's next.
Lee & Kate's Glass, family owned and operated for 95 years. Lee & Kate's Glass is your source for upgrading your home's glass, from shower doors and mirrors to windows and tabletops. Learn more at leeandkatesglass.com. Webster University, with campuses in Jacksonville and throughout Florida. Graduate business programs including the MBA, Human Resource Management, and Master of Health Administration. Enrolling for spring 2022 term. Info at webster.edu/Jacksonville.
It's pretty rare for U.S. spies, both current and former, to gather at a conference and talk about intelligence threats. When they did so recently, a clear theme emerged.
I've got to tell you all, and I know many of you are in the same boat, it's so odd after 27 years of being in clandestine service to see your picture and your bio pop up.
This afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Starting at 4 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, we talk with Blair Braverman, a writer and sled dog musher who's run the Iditarod in Alaska. She's also written a memoir and survived a harrowing experience on the survivalist reality show Naked and Afraid. She and her husband and mushing partner, Quince Mountain, have a new book called Dogs on the Trail. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
A new law in Los Angeles is upending the way the city deals with homelessness. It's now clearing away street camps the city considers unsafe, unsanitary, and inhumane, a move that critics say puts politics over need. Is LA's new approach the best solution for those who are unhoused? We'll take a closer look next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, after a tough stretch, local restaurants across the region are bouncing back from the pandemic as more people get vaccinated and more diners feel comfortable eating out. One new place to check out is the Southern Italian Deli and Market, a new venture by local artisan sausage company Cugino's. Both are owned and founded by Christopher Condon. Now, he says his new concept brings a deli feel from New York while also incorporating tastes of the South. In the latest of our occasional series on First Coast Dining, I spoke with Condon about surviving and thriving as a local restaurateur. Take a listen. You know, it takes a lot of courage and commitment to open a restaurant anytime, but especially in these times, you've got to be really good, really creative, and have a fresh concept. And it sounds like you do. So tell us about the Southern Italian Deli and Market.
Well, I always wanted to have a deli marketplace. My grandfather, from back where we're from, butcher shops, little restaurants, little delis, the old school feel. I just wanted to bring that back where people can come in, relax, enjoy some good food. We do a lot of food. We make most of our stuff in-house. So just getting back to the basics where a family and friends could come for lunch and just enjoy good food and good conversation.
Now, you bring a real kind of New York old school deli feel to this venture, which I know there are people in this part of Florida that say, I really miss that. I haven't been able to find that here. Is that a niche you're trying to fill?
We are, and we're trying to bring in some of the meat and stuff that you really can't get down in the South. A lot of the Italian type meats that are out there, the old butcher shop cuts. We really would like to bring in some, steaks that are fresh cut and other things and make some dishes to go like our lasagnas and give people the variety of up north. And, when you go back up, you always get that feeling of going to the butcher shop, they're slicing your meats and, they know your name. They know who you are. They know the family, and it's generational. And that's something that we're trying to recreate, and it's just going to take time for people to find us and be able to come and sit down and see what we can do. But during today, some things are harder to bring in than others, so we constantly try to source those things to bring in, for what the people want. And we ask them a lot of questions. What is something that, you miss from, whether it's New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Buffalo, all of that type of stuff. And that's what we're really trying to create here.
Yeah, sure. Now, I got to ask you, Chris, I'm a little worried that people who watched a lot of The Sopranos are going to roll into your place and say, I want some gabagool.
Yeah, and everybody calls something a little bit different, it's...
They might not know exactly what they're asking for.
I wish you could see my smile right now because that's funny. And people do today. They always ask between sauce. The biggest argument is between sauce and gravy. And
sure. Well, what do you call it? Is it the gravy in your world or the sauce?
It's just sauce.
It's just sauce.
That's what it's always been called. And, the other thing that gets me is people call stuff noodles. No, it's pasta, spaghetti, ziti. So, yeah, you've got that. And, if you ask my kids, sitting around a table, the sauce that we make is just the sauce that if you go to my aunt's house, her sauce tastes just a little bit different. A different aunt, a little bit different. Between me and my brother, it's the same, but you know whose house you're at when you're eating.
Right. Well, that's what makes it. Yeah, that's what makes it great. Now, you're open. You sort of had a soft opening in July, but you really are open. I'm going to repeat this in a minute, but the Southern Italian Deli and Market is at 5065 St. Augustine Road, Unit 5, Jacksonville. You're just south of Emerson on St. Augustine Road. Of course, you have the Market, and you are also known for your artisanal sausages through your other company, Cugino's. So as we come out of this pandemic, this is something that I think you probably feel. People are looking to go out to eat, and they want to do it safely, but they want to enjoy themselves, right?
Yes. Yeah, and we've all been through a lot, all small business. We owe Catullo's such a great thank you. They carried our sausage, and that helped us keep going. They were the first ones to carry it and it got the name out, and we would hand deliver it. That was actually a cool thing too, because I got to meet customers at that time, and the relationships that we have built over this last 18 months, they're irreplaceable.
And people need to come check it out. I've heard the pastrami is the best in town. So check it out. It's the Southern Italian Deli and Market at 5065 St. Augustine Road in Jacksonville. Owner Christopher Condon, he also owns Cugino's, who makes artisanal sausage. Chris, congrats, and I'm sure you've got a lot of happy customers.
Well, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate what you're doing for us as well.
Out to eat, folks. Be safe. And that's our show. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks also to our team, Heather Schatz, Josh Torres, Catherine Hobbs, Jessica Palumbo, Randy Roguski, and all of us here. And I'm Melissa Ross. Have a great Tuesday. We'll be right back here again at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North